So what ends up happening is I have an idea for what the share is going to be, and then one of the dates on the Jewish calendar comes around, and then I have to speak about that because we have an idea of speaking about the Inyana Diyoima, which means the thing that's most present at the time, like the issue of the day. So the issue of the day is the fact that within less than within less than 24 hours, we are going to begin Tisha B'Av, the ninth day of the month of Av, begins this year on Monday night. That is a day of mourning for tragedies that have befallen the Jewish people throughout history, beginning with the sin of the spies, as we see it written in the Bible. And then, of course, includes the destruction of the two temples, the declaration of the First Crusade by Pope Urban in the year 1095, the expulsions from England in 1290 and Spain during the reign of Ferdinand and Isabella in 1492, the deportation of the Jews from the Warsaw Ghetto to Treblinka in 1942, and the bombing of the Amia Jewish Community Center in Buenos Aires in Argentina in 1994, actually funded and orchestrated by the exact same country that is currently threatening to wipe Israel off the map and has done a tremendous amount to try to achieve this aim. Not that they will, but it's an amazing thing that this date has so many sad occasions associated with it. It has a particular, I don't want to say it has a particular spiritual power, because we are actually instructed as one of our mitzvot that we are not to look at specific times as auspicious or not. And yet we have, I don't want to say a bit of a mixed message, because we know that from the beginning of the month of Av, we are told to limit our expression of joy, because this is a period known as the 3 weeks. It begins on the 17th of Tammuz, the previous month, and during this 3 week period of time, we intensify our mourning over the temple until we reach the final culmination of that process on Tisha B'Av. And so therefore, from the beginning of the month of Av, the 9 days beginning from Rosh Chodesh of Av, we are to limit our expression, our outward expression of joy, and typically don't begin business ventures during this period of time because of all sorts of things that have happened. This has to be contrasted with the beginning of the month of Adar, where we are supposed to increase our public expression of joy because of the events of Purim. So whenever you have that kind of a parallel in Torah, in Jewish law, then there are certain things that we learn one from the other. In other words, what we have on Tisha B'Av really is dualistic. Because on the one hand, we are mourning the loss of the Bate Mikdash, but on the other hand, we are pivoting and looking into the future, the restoration of the Beit HaMikdash and Mashiach and the ultimate redemption of the Jewish people and of the world in general. So the concept of the Beit HaMikdash HaShlishi, the third temple, has a very central place in our understanding of the world that will be. I'm not talking about Olam Haba. I'm not talking about a future world that is mystical. I'm talking about a redeemed world that we live in now. This is the ultimate redemption and fulfillment of divine prophecy. So, like, you have these two elements, and really, I mean, yes, of course, we have to mourn what has happened, but we're not looking to get back to something. We're not looking for a return of the temple. We're looking forward to the third one and to all the events that surround that. So there is also a seed of hope. That's the difference between sadness and depression, is that depression has this bottomless pit quality to it. The mourning that we have on Tisha B'Av, which has halachic expressions. In other words, we don't conduct weddings during this period. We don't listen to music. From the beginning of Av until Tisha B'Av, we don't eat meat. We don't drink wine. There are several outward forms of expression that we have to commemorate this period. That's not something that's necessarily relevant to B'nai Noach. They don't have to conduct themselves in this way. But again, that is mourning, that is sadness. Mourning is about commemorating what we've lost. Sadness is a frustration of meaning. It's an understanding that we don't have what we want. Depression is something else. Depression is this kind of like hopeless place. That's something that we really cannot allow ourselves from a spiritual standpoint. This day of Tisha B'Av, we have a Masorah, a tradition that teaches that Mashiach, the Messiah, is born on that day. In other words, the day contains the element of sadness, but it also contains the element of the redemption itself. So this is the dual quality. So how does this relate to B'nai Noach, to Noahides? Well, the mourning part of it is relevant, for all of us who hope for its return, that our brothers and sisters of B'nai Noach can join with us in mourning its loss. And there will be some relevance for Noahides in that. We're gonna see that in sources soon. But I would like to turn our attention in the direction of the future, because that is really how time flows. It flows in a linear fashion, moving into the future and trying to understand better what it is that we need to be hoping for. So let's look at the role of the Beit HaMikdash HaShlishi in the broader context of the 7 Noahide laws and the implications of the rebuilding of the Beit HaMikdash for all humanity. If we look at Ezekiel chapter 43, verses 10 through 12, there's a description of the future temple and its sanctity, and all the intricacies of its construction, the laws concerning its construction and its function. It doesn't look like either of the first 2 Batei Mikdash. The Rambam in Mishnah Torah in Beit HaBechira, chapter 1, halacha 1, explains that the commandment to build the temple actually applies in every generation. Now, that doesn't mean necessarily that the conditions are right for it. But essentially, if the conditions do become right, then in every generation technically has the same obligation to build this thing. What does that tell us? It tells us that it's something that is relevant always. It's not something like one of the wonders of the ancient world that once existed, like the Colossus of Rhodes that we only see in drawings. And, we commemorate that as being something, wow, that must have been really special back then. We're talking about something that is always ever present, always meaningful. In Exodus chapter 25, verse 8, it says, "V'asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'socham." Let them make me a sanctuary, says God, that I may dwell bitocham. It doesn't mean that I shall dwell among them, really. I mean, that is the way that we translate that sentence. Bitocha means I shall dwell within them. That here we're talking about an infinite being who is to take his place, as it were, amongst humanity. And the way that is accomplished is through this edifice, through this Beit HaMikdash, through this Mishkan, through this Mikdash. We see in the Mishnah in Eduyot, chapter 1, Mishnah 2, that the Mishkan, as we see it, the tabernacle that we see in the desert, is carried on the shoulders, which signifies something similar to the third temple, where the Temple Mount kind of represents the shoulders of the world. And the temple, like the tabernacle, rests upon it. In other words, it's not just a physical structure. Because what physical structure could possibly contain an infinite being? It doesn't exist as a physical dwelling place for the sake, for God, because God is everywhere. It's there for our benefit, to operate as a spiritual center that draws the attention of all people towards the divine purpose of this world. In other words, for Noahides, that's a universal call to righteousness and the acknowledgement of the sovereignty of God in the world. It's a reminder to all humanity that there is a God in this world. What is the role of Noahides, though, vis-a-vis the Holy Temple? We see in Isaiah chapter 2, verses 2 and 3, it says, many peoples shall go and say, come, let us go up unto the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, etc. What this prophecy is speaking of is the participation of all nations in the worship of Hashem by Shlishi, in the third temple. We also have a verse in Zechariah chapter 14, verse 16, which describes the pilgrimage of all nations to Jerusalem to celebrate the festival of Sukkot in the Messianic era. We will get back to that. We have a prayer that we say every single day, Yibane Hamikdash b'meheira v'yameinu, that the temple should be rebuilt speedily in our days. And the purpose of this is that we're waiting for a restoration of sacrificial services and an indwelling of the Shekhinah and an indwelling of the divine presence in the world the way it was at that point in time. We don't really understand what it was like to have this thing there and to have the presence of God so close. It's like if you have bad posture and you walk like that for a long period of time, you don't even feel it anymore. And it's not until you go to the chiropractor and he makes an adjustment and he goes, and it really hurts because your body hasn't been in an anatomically natural position for a long time. And finally, it's exactly the way it's supposed to be. The seemingly miraculous nature of the world that was present during the time. In the Gemara, we see that the fruits were sweeter. You bit into a fruit and you tasted life. Now, okay, whatever, you go to your supermarket, you pick something up. It's probably been crossbred, an apple with a watermelon. I last time I went to the States, I went into the Price Chopper. I saw apples that were the size of a Volkswagen Beetle. And they're enormous, they're gorgeous, and they're beautiful. And you bite into them, and it doesn't taste anywhere near as big as it is. You know what I mean? Whereas apparently the nutrient value, both physical and spiritual, of the bounty of the earth that existed during the time of the temple was far greater. you would have been able to subsist on much less. So we're looking into that. We're looking forward to that. We see in the Babylonian Talmud, in Tractate Sukkah, on page 55b, the Gemara discusses the significance of the 70 bulls that are offered during Sukkot, Shivim Parim. Rabbi Elazar says the 70 bulls that are sacrificed as additional offerings over the course of the 7 days of Sukkot, to what do they correspond? They correspond to the 70 nations of the world. Now, we understand that there are more than 70 ethnicities in the world, 70 nations in the world, but the number 70 is a totality which encompasses all of humanity. So these 70 bulls that are offered on each day of Sukkot are corresponding to the 70 nations of the world, and they are brought to provide atonement for sins and also to bring world peace. Why? And on the 8th day of Sukkot, we have a single bull which corresponds only to the nation of Israel. But during the first 7 days, or the 7 days of Sukkot, the 8th day, Shmini Atzeret, is really in its own holiday, even though it's appended to Sukkot. Those 7 days are days where sacrifices are brought for the nations of the world. Rabbi Yochanan says, Oy lahem lagoyim, woe unto the nations of the world that lost and don't know what they lost. Who thinks about the Holy Temple anymore? But when the temple is standing, the Shivim Parim, the 70 bulls that are sacrificed on the altar during Chag Sukkot, during the festival of Sukkot, provide atonement for their sins. But now that the temple is destroyed, who atones for them? I saw in Likutei Moran, written by Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, that sin is very, very, very weighty. It really weighs us down. I think that people who look at their cell phone a lot get neck aches. Turns out that holding your head at a particular angle is equivalent basically to having 60 pounds on your neck. Can you imagine what the weight of sin is like? If you could somehow convert the spiritual weight of sin to a physical weight, we'd be crawling on the ground. In the time of the temple, we had an offering, a tamid offering in the morning and one in the afternoon. The one in the morning would take care of all the sins that were committed during the evening, and the one in the afternoon would take care of the ones that were committed during the day, so we could have a certain spiritual lightness, certain unburdened quality. But now we don't have that. What's the significance of neck aches? Well, the temple is considered to be the neck of the world. Why is it considered to be the neck of the world? This is something we find in the Medrash. Well, just like the neck, which contains the throat, brings food, air, and water into the body. It's the passageway through which food, air, and water comes into the body. And if that part got blocked off, that would be a major problem, wouldn't it? Right? If a person couldn't get food, air, or water into their body, that would be fatal. Well, the Beit HaMikdash serves as the conduit for prayer to ascend and for the blessings of Hashem to come into this world. So this is something that we need. This is something that we are all in a certain sense suffering because of its absence. Because that is our shared spiritual destinies, that relationship with Hashem and the benefit, the spiritual influx that he sends into this world that we all benefit from. So B'nai Noach, who in the best of times are Chasidei Umot HaOlam, have a special role in supporting and recognizing this sacred mission. It's something that it's a bandwagon you should be jumping on. Now, we know that the mission of B'nai Noach in this world is to uphold the 7 Noahide laws, which are foundational to the ethical structure of the world. They provide the ethical basis for this world. And we see in the Medrash Tanchuma, in Parshat Tzav, that the observance of these laws is connected to the ultimate redemption and the building of the Beit HaMikdash. And we see in the Rambam, in Laws of Kings and Their Wars, in chapter 11, halacha number 1, he says the following thing. The Messiah, Ben David, the son of David, will arise and restore the kingdom of David to its former glory. He will build the temple. He will gather the dispersed of Israel. In his days, all the laws will return as they were before. Sacrifices will be offered. Sabbatical and Jubilee years will be observed according to all the commandments stated in the Torah. Of course, we could go off on a tangent and point out that the Christian Messiah did not do any of these things, which pretty much disqualifies him as a Messiah. But I don't think we need to necessarily do that right now. But you see what's going on. You see what we're talking about. We're talking about a third temple, which is not there just for B'nai Israel, but is intended, as we see in Isaiah chapter 56, verse 7, as a house of prayer for all nations. What are the prerequisites that B'nai Noach can partake of right now? Of course, it's the Noahide laws. Those are the ethical prerequisites for participating in this divine service. Would you like to be around for that, for this unbelievable restoration? Of course you would. So making the observance of these laws a key component in your life is how you can prep for the third temple. Speaking a little bit further about the Messianic era, and by Shlishi, the third temple, we see in Hilchot Melachim of the Rambam, in his Mishneh Torah, chapter 11, halacha 4, he outlines the role of the Messiah in the building of the third temple. Right? That's what we were just looking at. That's part of his role, is to restore that third temple. And we also see in the Midrash Tehillim that the nations eventually recognize the truth of God and will flock to Jerusalem for that. I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but there's so many things going on in the world. Currently, I've heard there are 27 wars happening right now. And there is one war going on between Russia and Ukraine, which, in terms of the scope of the war and the lethality of the war and the scope of the destruction that comes about through this war, what is going on between Russia and Ukraine absolutely is outsized compared to what is going on here in Eretz Israel, between Israel and all the Iranian proxies. And yet, the minute this started on October 7th, all eyes were drawn here. You almost don't hear about the war in Ukraine anymore. What is this? Except for the fact that every human being seems to intuit that there is something essential about this place that is different. This is not just another geographic location. This is the place of redemption. This is the place where it all begins. This really is headquarters. This is literally the center of the universe here. So the minute anything happens here, the world's media turns in the direction of it. Now, of course, we see that it appears to be their mission to completely besmirch it and to demonize and to delegitimize Israel in its current manifestation. But if it didn't mean something to everybody, I don't think people would give so much of a bother about it. There are hurricanes that have resulted in greater death rates than this war, and yet people's attention comes here. The Rambam says, the prophets and sages did not long for the days of the Messiah in order to rule over the entire world. This is not a world domination scheme, but so that they would be free to study the Torah and its wisdom without anyone to oppress or disturb them, so that they may merit the world to come. Now, that happens to be the Rambam's perspective on what the Messianic era looks like. As far as he's concerned, all that means is that the B'nai Israel are no longer subjugated or beholden to anybody. They're free, essentially, to engage in the learning and practice of Torah in their own land. So the Messianic era, which is marked, of course, by the building of the third temple, represents the ultimate harmony between the nations and also the fulfillment of the Noahide mission. Because not only will the B'nai Israel be completely unfettered in their ability to connect to and learn and to pray and to practice and to fulfill the mitzvot here in Eretz Israel, but it will also be a time of general consciousness raising where the entire world will recognize the sovereignty of God and the truth of Torah. So really what we're talking about, and it's something to emphasize, because Tisha B'Av is coming, and I want you to take full advantage of what this moment means. This is not only a Jewish aspiration for the restoration of a nice building. It's a universal hope for the entire world. For the B'nai Noach, this is the fulfillment of their spiritual purpose and their role in the divine plan. So by understanding the significance of the third temple as we've laid it out, Noahides can now deepen their connection to the 7 laws because they understand that that is the springboard. That's preparing the ground. That's creating the world that Hashem wants, bringing about a world of justice, peace, and divine awareness of Hashem's presence in the world. And although we have a day of fasting, those of us of the B'nai Israel have a day of fasting and mourning and lamentations, Tisha B'Av is also referred to in halachic literature as a moed. Moed means an appointed time. Generally is the word that refers to Jewish holidays. Why is Tisha B'Av referred to as a moed? The answer to that question is because eventually it will be. Eventually, this day, which is the day of mourning over the loss of the 2 temples, will be replaced with a tremendous amount of joy, celebrated throughout the world for the restoration of the Beis HaMikdash and the coming of Mashiach. We should all see it very soon in our days.